You can take that starting point and really peel these characters back like an onion. You can start a character maybe doesn't seem like the most attractive person in the world, but then you can get to know them over 30 hours. And all of a sudden, I mean, I know in a lot of the longer games I've played, you do build relationships with certain characters, and once you start off going, oh, I cannot stand you, you
Right.
end up loving by the end. I
Well,
mean,
Witcher is kind of that way, right? That Geralt goes through this big journey where, he starts out a certain sort of very
as the
misogynistic sort of thing, and then at the end he ends up being a father figure. And
depending on what ending you
yeah,
choose.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
Depending upon how you've played it. Yeah.
I got that ending too, and I started off absolutely not liking the Witcher games. I didn't find them fun. I felt like they were punching me in my face with my gender. The fragility of my own gender, I felt I was constantly confronted by in The Witcher 2.
Right.
Because
Right.
every woman just ends up in such a terrible place, just forgotten. It's not that we're beaten up, it's not that we're menaced, it's that we're forgotten in the narrative. I mean, you can just choose to forget about Triss. Now,
Right.
I think that would mean you should be able to save your save file over in 3, and she doesn't want to talk to you anymore. I wouldn't have made that choice as a developer because it backs you. I mean, I get they were playing with that narrative structure. They were saying you don't have to catch the rabbit. And I appreciate that, but they did it again and again and again. I mean, Vess, she only consents to sex if you don't treat her differently than a man. And then when you go to avenge her rape and the murder of her unit, oh no, you can't come, Vess. We don't want you to get hurt again. That's treating her different than a man.
Yeah. Yeah. That's yeah.
And that happened to me. Fortunately, I saved the game because I just wanted to see what would happen. I was Triss OTP. I Triss all the way.
Oh,
Um,
right. Right.
so I just saved it to see what would happen, and then went back and resumed my
Try the
proper
other ones. Yeah.
playthrough. Yeah, because I wasn't playing that game all the way through again, especially with the massive narrative branch that forces you to do it to see the other side anyway. But I was like, oh God, I felt like a dick. I felt like a bad boyfriend. Like the game was forcing me to be the lying jackass. I cannot stand and sure, baby, I don't see you as any differently than anybody else. And I had
Right. Right.
no choice. And I was so illogically angry about that because it trumped on my insecurity that men do see me differently the minute they see me sexually. They won't take me seriously in other regards.
Right.
And that really destroyed my enjoyment of the game. So then I played The Witcher 3. And I almost didn't play it. I only played it because I got it as a free code with my new graphics card.
Oh, really?
Nvidia had a
Yeah.
promotion where you got a free game key of The Witcher 3 with purchase. And I'm like, oh God, the universe is making me play this game. Okay. And I was so surprised at the improvement in execution from 2 to 3. Triss was still Triss, and she was still a bit of a doormat, and it was an interesting exploration where, as a woman, Triss drove me crazy. As a partner for my male protagonist, Triss was awesome. And that
Yeah.
was a voyage of discovery for me. And then the ending was just so. A game is well made when the choices you make give you the ending you want. Because I got the Ciri feels and the Triss feels, and he ended up as kind of a kept man while Triss was off making the money because she got her status back that she lost at the beginning of The Witcher 2. That was the ending I got. But I always felt, because when this game became a thing and it became so controversial, I did my research and I went back and read some of the original Witcher stories.
Right. Yep.
And I felt like there was some stuff in the source material I wish I'd seen more in the games. And a big one was Yennefer. Yennefer was so much better as a character than a device. She is hands down one of the most complex, challenging, well done female characters in gaming, and I would claim any media ever. She
Wow, that's a strong endorsement. Yeah.
she's so complex and in the way that only a sexualized character can be, right? I mean, her sexual dynamism is connected to the way she makes choices and the choices she makes, and she's exceptionally well defined. And as silly as the, sex on a unicorn thing was,
Right.
I think people are getting caught on that. You're talking about two people who are forced together. They didn't choose to be together. They made this pact with the beyond and they're stuck with each other. And the moment in game where you can actually choose, are we going to continue this bond or are we going to break it? The fact that you can't have Triss and
And
Yennefer.
Yennefer, or you can try. Have you seen
It
that
doesn't
ending?
go well.
Yeah, it doesn't go
Yeah, it
well.
doesn't
Yeah.
go well at all. And I'm like, good CD Projekt. But also the scenes where Yennefer takes charge and does something that doesn't involve sex and romance. Those are like, we need these discussions about female leadership, about women making tough choices that could be wrong. When she demolishes that sacred tree because there's a problem. She's going to solve the problem. And boom, male characters in games have made that sort of destructive choice over and over and over again. So why can't a woman do it? Why do we always have to be the friggin' Earth Mother, right? And
Right,
then
right.
and then that
And
scene with Uma, the little guy, the ugliest man.
right, the little ugly guy who's actually, well, we won't give it away,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
But I love that character. I was like, more Uma, more Uma. But then she basically risks his life to figure out what's going on. She is obsessed with discovery. She needs to
Right.
know. She
She's
is,
willing to kill him to find out. Yeah.
because she is so different than Triss. And she's a Roman candle. I mean, she's really pretty to watch soar through the sky, but get too close and you're gonna get burned, right? What an astoundingly good character. And then Philippa Eilhart as well. She was sort of the stereotypical Lavender Menace lesbian in 2, but her revenge plot in 3 was so enjoyable to play. And what I loved is that there are enough women in the Witcher games, especially 3, that they could be characters and they could be flawed and they could differ from each other and have different solutions to things and disagree and create challenges. And I mean, the fact that there's that
They have motivations, right? They're not just eye candy. They're trying to do their own thing. And I totally agree with you that, I praise The Witcher 3 for the same reasons. And it's one of those things where anytime I see a criticism of The Witcher 3 by a feminist, I say it passes the Bechdel test. You've got the conclave and they're talking to each other about their issues. This is, even though it's a game about The Witcher. So anyway, I'm very much in line
and
with you. I think CD Projekt Red did a great job.
the interesting thing about The Witcher is it's called The Witcher, but one of the fundamental things about those games is that Geralt has no geopolitical power.
Right.
He can go along and slay monsters, and his role is to kind of be the garbage man for these
Right.
various little hamlets and villages, but he doesn't have any control over the bigger picture, what kings do what. I mean, in 2, it was more complicated because he was going around, him and blanking on his name, the other Witcher, the bald guy. They were both going around killing monarchs. That whole Kingslayer thing
Right.
was more complicated. But in 3, he doesn't have much control over how the world goes, and it makes the character as a hardwired cynic. And from an RPG perspective, I was kind of I'm kind of chasing this pre-build in a way. It's an action RPG, so I eventually became okay with that. I got my head around, no, I am chasing the pre-build. It's not a customized character. You can choose what his magic powers are going to be, but not his core personality. And so I started kind of seeing the world of The Witcher through his eyes. But that's the thing about games, isn't it? they're the stories of worlds told through the avatar of the player, as opposed to films needing this really convenient, like this really tied up in a bow beginning, middle, and end. And I think that exploration is a very different thing about game design. You don't have to tie everything up at the end of a game. You can leave the player with questions as long as they're the right questions, as long as you give them some satisfaction. I mean, how many games have ended on cliffhangers now? Because they're assuming a sequel that may or may not
Right.
come. But I think that's a really different thing. We're still learning how to tell interactive stories in a way that isn't stealing from cinema. And I think that certain game companies are taking that challenge more seriously than others. Naughty Dog is never going to reinvent the storytelling, conventions in video games. They build limited narrative action games that are essentially on a rail. The open world games, I find the crime games so interesting. They took me a while to get into. It was Saints Row 3 that finally brought me home for those games, because it is so goofy and satirical and farcical. But it's a crime game, so you're doing those sort of American crime cinema Tarantino kind of deal. But because you're in control, and they did have that media element in Saints Row where they got into films, and that's, I guess, what clicked it for me, the Armageddon spoof at the beginning of the game. Or is that 4? I don't know. No, they were President in 4. But it was that self-awareness that made me realize, right, this isn't about crime. These games, Grand Theft Auto, Saints Row, things like that, are about crime cinema and about the choices your character makes within essentially a giant interactive movie. Like, imagine if these American crime cinema things, imagine if Pulp Fiction was real. Oh God, that's a terrifying thought.
Right.
And, if you're not allowed, if you're not given the option to kill prostitutes in that setting, you get no emotional reward for being kind of a good criminal. Like, I'm a criminal,
Well,
but I'm better than those other criminals. And if a player chooses for themselves, if you're forced into that choice, you don't get that sense of, oh, good back pats, all
ex-
around. I'm a good car thief.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about games. I think you've hit on it. It has an aspect of free will. You can discover your own kind of moral center through playing games about, well, who would I be in this situation? What sort of choice would I make? And what are the consequences? You don't get that in film. You don't get that in TV.
No.
But in games, now you can make a choice about what you're going to do in the situation and learn not only something about the character, but about yourself. And I think that's, fantastic. That's something that needs to be celebrated, that we should be talking about that all the time as one of the key distinguishing factors.
Now, for management, I'm interested in this stuff because one of the things I feel is misunderstood about gaming is that we've kind of transplanted the idea of the auteur, the auteur filmmaker into gaming. And so we take these faces of companies, whether it be Ken Levine, almost called him Adam Levine. I'm like, no, that's a
Yeah, yeah.
very different guy. Whether it be, Ken Levine or Cliff Blazinski or one of these voice actors like a Jennifer Hale or a Troy Baker that carry these franchises on their
Like
backs.
Sid Meier. Sid Meier would
Yeah.
be, yeah, like he
Like,
doesn't even work on some of the games that has his name,
well, he's the Tom Clancy of video games, right? He just lends his name to this brand at this point.
Right.
But it's false. It there's a team of like 35 to 45 people working collaboratively to make these games happen. And people seem to think that it's not like a film that you can Kevin Smith out of it and make a Clerks. That's a game like Undertale.
Right.
Yeah, sure. You can make a game with like 4 people. It's not like the days of Mortal Kombat where the original Mortal Kombat was made essentially by 4 guys, right? It's this huge collaborative effort now, and I love that. I think that this is an environment, in other careers, in other sectors, they've shown that women thrive in collaborative environments. And that's why I think it's kind of artificial The problem is that the schooling to get certified for game design isn't collaborative. There's like this disconnect. But as a manager, how have you kind of found that dynamic, that challenge of basically you can't do it for your team. You have to figure out how to motivate your team to do it. Is that like, I'd imagine that takes a while to get good at.
Yeah, well, I think I approach things early on from an understanding of I'm not building the models, I'm not doing the programming, I'm not doing the sound, I'm not doing the art. So my role is as support to go and knock down all the barriers to so that these guys can do their best work. But that's kind of my management style. Some of the people you were talking about earlier, I see them as brands, right? The reason that they're on those game titles is because they're recognized as a stamp of a certain level of quality. And so players will say, "Oh, well, he had something to do with this, or she had something to do with this. Let's stamp that on there as a mark, so people will go and buy it." But but from a management perspective, yeah, games are really, really big, especially the AAA games. And so they're very collaborative. There's a lot involved, and there's a lot on the executive side. There's a lot on what they think is going to sell. I'm sure it's the same way with AAA movies, anything like that. That's why I love indie games. I look on Steam all the time for indie games because that's to me where it's just like indie film. That's where the interesting things are happening. I'm a fan of like Jonathan Blow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Braid and the way he subverted the damsel in distress trope. Have you played Braid?
I have not. I am too close to Mist to enjoy. Oh, sorry, not. You're
You're
thinking The
Braid,
Witness. Braid. Yes, I
not
have
The Witness.
played Braid.
Yeah.
I have played Braid. Braid was brilliant structurally. I wanted to punch the writing.
It was like really obtuse, wasn't it? The
Oh,
writing
it
was
was
like,
so. I am a poet,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I am going to tell the player everything that is going on because the player is too stupid to understand that this game is based on the mechanic of a do-over,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know? And I do like sort of the paper bag princess element to it that yeah, he's a douche. I like the main character, that was a
you
game.
just gave away the end of the game.
Yeah, okay, I
I
guess I
know, but
did, but this my audience will probably find it
but
like they have this visceral reaction to people like Jonathan Blow who talk a lot. I mean, what an apt last name. He is good at challenging paradigms. And I wish we could see there's a classic example of a guy with absolutely clear strengths. And because he's so great at core mechanics, right? He really understands what he wants to do with the game. But if we criticize his dialogue, then oh, you're kicked out of the tribe. You are now outcast because you don't
right.
love everything he does, as opposed to being able to say, I would have liked Braid a lot more if the character stopped whining at me. And I feel that way about a lot of games. Show me, don't tell me. And caveat, game developers, especially indie game developers, have the right to make any game they want. I don't want Jonathan Blow to change what he's doing for me. I would perhaps like to see him collaborate. Now, I don't know if he can do that
Yeah,
the
and
way.
maybe he can't, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with what you're saying. But to me, that there's a satisfaction of approaching each game on its own merits. And I think you do this as well, right? You just approach it and say, what am I going to experience here? What is the designers or the developers, experimenting with, exploring here? It makes it very exciting. And then I think you're right. It turns into this false dichotomy where you either have to love it or you have to hate it. And instead of saying, well, I like these aspects and this they were clever with, and actually I think the development community, guys who have worked in games, we do a lot of that. We look at games, pick them apart, find the things we like, find the things we don't like, things they did well, things they didn't do well. But for some reason, especially I see it in the press and it's reflected in fans, it turns into an all or nothing proposition, right?
Well,
It's all good or it's all bad.
that's
Yeah.
because of the way games are reviewed. We
Yeah,
we
yeah.
live in this ridiculous paradigm for in order for a game to be worth purchasing, it has to be a 9 out of 10.
Right. And what does
That's
that even mean, right? Yeah.
that my favorite games tend to come in at around a 7 because they're
Yeah.
challenging. People are either going to get them or they don't get them. But because there's this, out of 10 and there's financial incentives to get a numeric review, a process that the developer has no control over. The only control you guys would have is to be able to go out and set expectations. And I think video game marketing does that quite poorly. I really enjoy being able to go to the previews and talk to the developers and find out
Right.
what their intents were for the game. Because for instance, the Halo Wars franchise, Halo Wars 2, if I had gone into that as an experienced RTS player, if I had gone into that just blind, I would have been, this is junk. But
You don't know what it's trying to do.
I
Right.
had the ability to talk to Dan Ayub, and he said, this is, he didn't say it this way, but what I got from the conversation is this is an RTS for Halo players, not a Halo game for RTS players. They are trying to be baby's first RTS. They're trying to bring people into the genre because they love it and they want to see it be more popular. And so they're using the power of the Halo brand to expose shooter players to games beyond shooters. And he deserves the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for that attempt, man. Like, that is a tall order. And you can't get into a philosophical discussion about whether RTS belongs on a console. You just have to see how they did it. And is there something worthy? Is it actually playable? And it's certainly not a PC experience, but I loved the workarounds they found. Like the way they actually changed the way the maps work, because it's on console and you can't bop around and you don't have that mini map that you click at the bottom.
Right. Right.
There was a lot of great design achievement that I would have been absolutely blind to had I not had that primer. But that primer is precisely what we don't get from game marketing.
No, and I think you're totally right on this. And as long as we're on this topic about marketing and developers and the press and then the PR, right? You poked at it earlier, and I completely agree that the PR deliberately insulates developers from press. The thing is even though I think that creates kind of a rift, a misunderstanding at times, it also prevents things like what we saw with No Man's Sky, where Sean Murray gets off the leash and he just starts saying everything that he would like to do and what he would imagine it would be, and then you end up with all these disappointed players out there. And so PR is serve an important role. I'm not sure how we get around this thing of setting expectations with developers talking directly to the press without some sort of intercessory, except in the indie field. In the indie field, all of a sudden that goes away and they can talk directly. So, I'm a big advocate for independent development, and it's the Sundance of games.
I saw it change. I've been in this a long time.
Yeah.
My spirit animal in gaming is Flemeth. I've been sitting in my hut in the woods watching everybody else fight for so long that I just crack jokes about everything. But I saw the relationship between the game companies and the press change. In the 90s, it was a lot of come on in, because they were fighting against that moral panic, right? But
right.
then the press was looking for the gotcha. They would dump on games just because they could. There was such a negative spin that I don't blame the game companies for retreating and going, well, if access is just going to generate negatives, first rule of PR, don't seek out negatives, play to your strengths. So it's not the fault of the PR companies, but I think that now, because things are done by spreadsheet instead of by feel, and I'm a big advocate of design by feel. Some things you just can't explain. They just feel right in the interface, or they don't. And the goal of a design by feel person is to translate that feeling as to what needs to be fixed. But there's also PR by feel. The people who seem to be willing to get it should be given that access, because that creates a better games press. This thing now of, oh, you need such and such traffic to get access, to get the press badge, because it's strictly a numbers game, which is one form of merit, but not the only form of merit. And of course, how do you get a ton of followers fast? You crap on a convenient target.
Right. Create some
right?
controversy. Get people
Right.
to, yeah.
So you'll say Grand Theft Auto maims and dumps women, right? That's guaranteed to get you a headline because people are going to freak out.
Right.
Or, you know, you make a game called Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian, and everybody will clutch their pearls and go, oh, how terrible. But now people know the existence of that company and that designer who hadn't before. You know, what was that game? Um, the one that actually was a murder simulator that was crowdfunded. It was deliberately a free speech um,
Was,
exercise.
was this the one where you could put the plastic bags over people's
That's
heads and that sort of stuff?
Manhunt. That's
Manhunt?
a different game. There was another one. It was an isometric shooter, and I'm blanking on the name of it. But it was like
It's
the
not
Crow
Postal,
on
is it? Right?
steroids.
Because
No, no, no. It was like the
that's
protagonist was like the Crow on steroids, and I don't remember the name of it. But
Hotline Miami.
no,
That's
that's a lot more artful than this game ended up being.
mm,
Oh, it's gonna drive me crazy. But this game was basically the whole thing was it's free speech, it's protected speech. So if we want to make, and it wasn't maiming and dumping women, it was shooting everybody. Like you could kill men, you could kill women. There's this. I talked about this with Rich from Realtek. The way gamers see the world versus the way non-gamers see the world. That somebody coming at you with a knife in a gamer sees an enemy. Somebody
right.
else seems, oh, that's a woman. And it's decided, no, no, you're supposed to be the bigger person. And, you know, it's that whole quasi rape fantasy of you're supposed to grab her by the wrist and pin her against the wall and have her drop the knife and then she cries and it's all okay.
Right. Right.
No,
And no gamer is going to do that, right?
no, she's
Yeah.
trying to kill me. The object of the game is to kill her first so she doesn't kill me because life's not like that. You can't save people from themselves. Sometimes there is no C option. And I think that games are broad enough that, and I know there's sort of a modular level design thing, and sometimes one team doesn't talk to the other when they're creating these missions, but games don't have to tell just one thing. The side quests can explore all these different types of characters. You don't have to pick one plot. You can have that end that way and another thing, you know, end in a very different way and have them both sort of stand side by side. I mean, that's another problem with the view process. There's not enough time to play these games. And so, you know, I will have an experience because of the choices I made that's fundamentally different from another reviewer. And they go, oh, this game is this and that and does this to women. And I'm like, what are you freaking talk about? Did we play
Right.
the
Yeah.
same game? No, we didn't in fact play the same game because we only had 48 hours to play a 35-hour game. So we raced through it and there was no overlap in the experience. I took the high road, they took the low road, and we hit Scotland before the embargo deadline. You know, there was no ability to judge the game as a whole.
You know, there's a developer side to that too, which I think comes out, especially in these open world games, where we can't ever conceivably QA everything that your public is going to do, everything that fans are going to do. So you will see things in games that you're like, wow, I didn't know you could do that, and you're the developer. And it's kind of surprising when people will come and call you out for something. Hey, did you know this? I remember getting screenshots from people. Hey, look at what I did. And you'll be like, wow, I didn't know you could do that. That's amazing. Because games are so huge and the systems are so large, that when you appeal to a million people, somebody's going to find these crazy things. And then somebody's going to go and find that crazy thing and use it as a representation of that entire game or that entire genre sometimes. And you'll
Yeah,
be like, that's insane.
that happened with, what was it, Assassin's Creed, that bug that I've seen in other games where basically the camera pushes through the skin and so you just get the eyes and
Right.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
jaw. It's not actually a terribly bad bug. It's just it didn't stop, right? But people had a feel because it was so visually ugh, right? But the Dishonored guys were saying what you said, that they got people in and played this game and they were doing things they absolutely did not predict. But that's the nature of video games, isn't it? The story's not finished until the player
Right.
plays
It's
through.
you don't know what you
You're
have until you experience it. Yeah.
Yeah, you're selling the entertainment equivalent of a cake mix, right? It's up to the player to
Right.
put in. You're not going to the store and buying this beautifully frosted, marzipan delight or whatever. You're giving them the mix and the eggs and the milk and the water and make it yourself. And some people will create a very pretty product. Other will create this kind of monstrous, lopsided, looks like a vaguely round lump of poo, but they
Right.
enjoyed it because they made it with their own hands,
Right.
And I think that, see, these are the tools we're lacking when we do any sort of games analysis, not just what we call feminist game criticism, when I think really it should be broadened to be the examination of gender and game design. Again, because gender is systems, sociologically, masculinity is a system, femininity is a system. There are certain things. We talk about constructs. This is what we're talking about, right? Somebody decided men wore pants. Before horseback riding, nobody wore pants. But we see it now as the natural state for men to wear pants. And because, this is the other thing again, dresses are seen as the aberration. So it's okay for women to wear pants, but not as okay for men to wear skirts. And
Except in Scotland, right?
except
Yeah.
in Scotland, we all go back to my people, man. Ginger, saving the world from itself. But I think this is important to talk about because everything is constructed in a game. I mean, I think when we start talking about these things, there's no human physiology. There are no hormones and actual blood vessels. And, people don't check their insulin in games very often unless it's a plot point. There is no
Right.
blood and guts in a video game character. I mean, the Assassin's Creed bug showed us all. No, the characters are empty inside. No,
Right.
really. They're just, they're just avatars.